All right, welcome to The Explainer. We're all about digging into the story behind the story using the slides you see on screen. Today, we are diving headfirst into the incredibly complex forces at play in Nigeria, and a narrative that, well, might not be what it seems at all.
So let's start with this. A statement attributed to Donald Trump floating the idea of U.S. troops on the ground in Nigeria. And the stated mission? To protect Christians from violence. Now that is a powerful, very specific picture of a conflict, for sure.
On the surface, it seems pretty clear-cut. But, as soon as you hear a claim that big, you've got to ask the question, right? Is that story actually what's happening in the regions being torn apart by this violence?
Well, according to the source material we're digging into today, an analysis by investigative journalist David Hundeyin, that official story being sold to politicians in the West, it just doesn't hold up when you really look at the facts.
Okay, now this is where things get really, really interesting. Take a look at this chart. The violence is absolutely tragic, and it's hitting everyone. Christians, Muslims, people practicing traditional African religions. But here's the kicker, from the source material. The vast majority of the people being killed are actually Muslim. And that fact, well, it really complicates that simple story about a targeted war on Christians, doesn't it? So, if the actual numbers don't point to some kind of anti-Christian genocide, where did this whole powerful idea even come from? Let's take a look at how this specific narrative was actually built and promoted. It turns out a key piece of this puzzle is a report from 2019. It's called Silent Slaughter, put together by a couple of British-funded NGOs. And they didn't just publish it online. No, they hand-delivered it right to the top brass in the U.S. government. We're talking Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence. And its message was crystal clear. A genocide against Christians is happening right now in Nigeria.
So how on earth could they make a genocide claim when more Muslims were dying? Well, it all comes down to this really clever or maybe tricky statistical argument the source calls disproportionate impact. Imagine this. You've got a village that's 90% Muslim and 10% Christian. An attack happens, and 80 Muslims and 20 Christians are killed. Now, even though 4 times as many Muslims died, you can argue that Christians died at twice the rate of their population. And that was the exact logic they used to frame it as a targeted genocide.
And this quote from the source, David Hundeyin, just hits the nail on the head. He asks, there's still 80 dead Muslims. What do you call them? You see, by focusing only on that disproportionate statistic, the vast majority of victims, the 80 Muslims in our example, they just disappear from the story. It's like they're totally erased, pushed into a memory hole. So why go to all this trouble? What was the real endgame? According to the source, the whole point of this report was to get the U.S. to appoint a special envoy to Nigeria. Now, that might sound like a small bureaucratic step, but it is a huge deal. Why? Because the appointment of a U.S. special envoy to Sudan is what happened right before that country split in two. Okay, so this brings us right to the heart of the entire argument. If religion is just a convenient cover story to get Western powers involved, what is really driving all of this horrific violence? Well, the analysis proposes a completely different way of looking at this. It's like being a detective. Step 1, you take a map and you mark all the hotspots, all the places where these attacks keep happening. Step 2, you get a geological survey map of Nigeria, one showing where all the valuable solid mineral deposits are hidden. And step 3, you lay one map right on top of the other. The source argues they're not just similar, they're a perfect match. And that leads to a pretty shocking conclusion. This view says the violence isn't really about God or ethnicity. It is a brutal, systematic campaign to clear people off their land, to drive away poor farmers, Muslim and Christian alike, because they happen to be living on top of some of the world's most valuable rare earth minerals. It's a land grab on a terrifying scale, basically creating a giant open pit mine for powerful global players. Okay, let's zoom out, because this isn't just happening in a bubble. The source argues that this whole resource struggle in Nigeria is a key battleground in a much, much bigger geopolitical competition, a rivalry for influence between the United States and China.
So first up, let's talk about the money. Their economic playbooks, according to the source, are like night and day. On one side, you have the U.S. model, often working through institutions like the IMF and World Bank. This usually means taking on debt and following policy advice like devaluing your currency or cutting subsidies. Then you have the China model. It seems to be all about concrete stuff, building massive infrastructure projects, offering state credit for construction, and sweetening the deal with things like 0% tariffs on trade.
And if you want to see the impact of that first model in the real world, just look at Nigeria's currency, the naira.
After following some of those economic policies, its value absolutely collapsed. We're talking a drop of over 50% against the US dollar in just over a year. For a country that depends on imports, that is completely devastating. Okay, so what about their political strategies? Well, they're described as being just as different. The source characterizes the US model as one that gets directly involved, funding NGOs, supporting political opposition groups, trying to shape things from the inside. China, on the other hand, operates on a stated policy of non-interference, basically a hands-off approach to domestic politics.
And this slide right here is a perfect illustration of that Chinese model in action. Instead of loans of cash that can, sometimes vanish, the engagement results in tangible things you can see and touch. Brand new railway lines connecting major cities, new deep-sea ports, metro systems. It's all about physically building things up.
And look, none of this is happening in a vacuum. The source connects this to a dynamic that goes back decades. It starts with a 1974 US government report that actually identified a strong, developed Nigeria as a potential threat to American interests. You fast forward to 2019, you get that silent slaughter report. Then, just recently, China restricts its rare earth exports, and boom, the US announces an urgent plan to build a whole new supply chain within 2 years. The pace is definitely accelerating.
So you put all of this together, the fierce competition for resources, the rivalry between great powers, and it places Nigeria in an incredibly tough spot. It's caught at a critical crossroads.
So what is the big takeaway here? The analysis we've explored today essentially reframes the entire conflict. It suggests that what looks like a religious war from far away might, on closer inspection, actually be a proxy battle, a symptom of a much larger global struggle for the critical resources that are going to power the 21st century. And ultimately, the source material leaves us with this one final, provocative thought. For a resource-rich nation like Nigeria, is it truly able to chart its own course? Or is it destined to be a playing field, a chessboard, where the geopolitical games of global powers are won and lost? It's a question about power, resources, and the very meaning of independence in our modern world.